to everybody for taking the time to listen to this talk. And most of all, thanks to CLTC, to Steve and Anne for the support of my work over many years. So it's a very short talk. I'll try to just give you a sense of what the motivations are and what we are doing. In one word, it's traffic analysis for enabling anonymity, trying to improve anonymity through techniques from traffic analysis. So what is anonymity? See if I can make this work, right? So, so people are used to various notions of security like integrity, confidentiality, privacy, and so on. But there's another goal that one might have in being secure over a network, which is perhaps to be able to deny that you've actually carried out a communication, or to be able to carry out a communication without people knowing that it's taking place. So it's basically the ability for a person A to talk to another person B without an observer of the network traffic being able to tell that the communication has taken place. Of course, this observer is not necessarily someone who actually owns the system, because such a person would have excessive knowledge about what's going on and might indeed be very difficult to be anonymous with respect to the system that's running the application. Now, anonymity, as you can imagine from this quick definition, already has many sort of sides to it. It has both pros and cons. It's considered a very good thing to have because in today's world, there are many societies where people are not as free as they are in the United States, for instance, or in the Western world in general. And enabling anonymity allows people to be able to speak their mind without fear of reprisal. But even in free societies, there are internal organizations that might need to be kept, so to speak, honest. And whistleblowers, for instance, who might play a role in doing that, need to be protected. And of course, privacy is also better preserved by enabling your communications to be anonymous. But there are also extremely serious cons. I mean, it can enable all kinds of nefarious activities like the dark web, etc. So it's a complicated philosophical and ethical question as to whether you want to consider this something that is good or bad. But irrespective of these issues, there already are applications around that provide anonymous capabilities for anonymous communication. And some of the widely known ones are Tor, Freenet, I2P, etc. There are many such applications around. So let's take a look at Tor, for instance, which is very popular. It runs on a protocol called onion routing, which employs the idea of Chaum mixing, which is going to be central to my discussion here. And I'll describe what it is later. And the general idea is that there are some special nodes in the network which are called mix nodes. And in fact, you can volunteer to be one if you want. And roughly speaking, when somebody wants to communicate anonymously, they connect to an entry node, which is called a guard node in Tor. And then there's some relaying, which might just take three hops, where a guard node would relay to something called a middle node, and then to an exit node, which is the one delivering the traffic. Now you can volunteer to be a middle node or an exit node. And if you're an exit node, you tend to have liability because it looks as if the traffic is coming from you. So if you're doing something nefarious, or you're enabling somebody to do something nefarious, then you're kind of the one in trouble. Now, my talk is kind of based on technical analysis of some of the underlying protocols to try to improve anonymity. But just to give you a sense of the importance of the problem, Tor traffic is already quite substantial. This is something that I got off the web yesterday, and it seems to relate to just the last 2 months or so of traffic on Tor. You can see the vertical scale. This is the advertised bandwidth by these various kinds of nodes. So there are exit nodes in blue. The green is nodes that can be either guard or exit nodes, and so on. And it's on the scale of several hundred gigabits per second. So it's fairly substantial. And indeed, Tor is maintained and enables communication from societies that might not be so free, for instance. Now, what is Chaum mixing? So the general idea is that somebody who's observing traffic in the network might be able to figure out who's talking to who based on timing analysis. So imagine, for instance, that the red packet here is going to the red destination and the blue packet's going to the blue destination through some intermediate node. Well, just by observing this, you might be able to tell that the red packet was the one that got in later, and got out later. So the red is the red and the blue is the blue. Now, of course, the content is typically encrypted, but nevertheless, even encrypted content looks like a bit string of some sort. So you can correlate the incoming bit string to the outgoing bit string and figure out which is which. I mean, which incoming guy corresponds to which outgoing guy. And so you kind of, this emphasizes the need for retiming packets if you want to provide anonymity. And that's roughly what happens in Chaum mixing. So you have an infrastructure of a bunch of nodes, which are called mixes. And essentially what you do is you allow these mixes to delay packets and reorder them. Now, of course, delaying packets is not very good from the point of view of performance. So you have some kind of a trade-off between performance and anonymity. And that's sort of the thing that we study in this project. Now, the idea in the Chaum mix is essentially to just put the packet inside an envelope. So what's going to happen is that between the, say, the source and the mix node, there will be a key that is agreed on, and the already encrypted packet will be encrypted even one more layer, which is like putting a second layer of encryption, which is of course shared between these two nodes in principle. So the envelope can be removed and then the packet can be forwarded. The idea is that somebody who's looking at the system just sees two yellow packets coming in, and then something goes out here and something goes out there, but they have no idea who's talking to who. Of course, there's if this is viewed as just a block system, they know that somebody in this pair of inputs is talking to somebody in this pair of outputs, and that already reveals some information. So you're kind of got to be careful about those kinds of issues also. How does this work in a multi-stage system? Well, you might have a green envelope for this stage, which gets peeled off, and then things get put in a yellow envelope, and then they go on this stage, and then it gets peeled off, and then it gets delivered to the destination. So now I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures to illustrate kinds of things that we are thinking about. So in a network, of course, there might be a lot of mixed nodes sitting around. So those are these red squares. And there might be some flows that are not even using the anonymity, the capability of being anonymous. And then there may be some anonymous flows. And you somehow want to design the actions of the mixed nodes in such a way as to enable as much anonymity as possible. Of course, that's an impossible problem to formulate at this level of complexity. But that's the kind of thing we're interested in. We're interested in some kind of anonymity delay trade-off. So anonymity is being provided by this ability to delay incoming packets and reorder them. And the more you do that, the more things you can group together, roughly speaking. So the more you can mix things up from the point of view of disabling an observer from figuring out who is talking to who. So that's the inherent trade-off from a traffic analysis point of view. Now, a delay is kind of easy to understand, but what exactly is anonymity? How does one actually quantify anonymity? Well, there are many ways of doing that. I mean, there are computer science ways of doing that based on attack models, etc. But we are taking a statistical viewpoint in this project. And more precisely, we're taking an information theoretic viewpoint. So let me illustrate that in this picture. So let's say that there's a node here which is a mixed node, or it might be just a schematic for a much bigger system. There are two flows coming in. One is, say, red packets coming from, say, Alice, and green packets coming from Bob. And then this mix sort of delays these packets and mixes them up. And so an observer just sees a bunch of packets going out, which are here black packets. Now the observer's got to figure out which of these correspond to the red guys, which of these correspond to the green guys, because that will sort of determine, I mean, these are going to go to some places, some destinations, and then it will give you some idea of who's talking to who. So the statistical way to do that is to think about some maximum likelihood analysis, which gives you a conditional distribution on how to sort of which of these incoming packets to attribute to the outgoing packets. And then we look at the entropy of this distribution. And the higher it is, entropy is just a measure of uncertainty. The higher it is, the more anonymous you are. So that's how we measure things in this project. And you can do the same sort of thing in a network. This is a much more complicated picture where one mix is mixing up, say, two of these flows, and then those mixed flows are being mixed with the third flow. And eventually the observer is trying to do some end-to-end analysis of who's talking to who. And you can basically figure out a metric for anonymity by looking at the overall conditional distribution. And the general idea is that you have some bound on how much delay you might be willing to attribute to allow. And therefore, this traffic naturally breaks up into cycles, which are separated by gaps which are bigger than that delay, and you can measure the anonymity at that level. Now let me tell you specifically what this project's about. I see a Q&A question. I think something not connected with me, I think. So we are motivated, actually what motivated us to get into this project was a new idea, again due to David Chaum, which is a way of sort of speeding up this mixing process by pre-computation. So the mixing process is kind of slow because it currently, most of the deployed systems use the public key infrastructure. But Chaum's idea, which he's commercializing now in a company called Elixir, which I should say I've got nothing to do with, as a disclaimer, just interested in this idea, is to use pre-computed peer-to-peer keys to make mixing more scalable and to bring it down to a level where it can be used by low-power devices and so on. Basic thesis here is that pre-computation allows for less latency and lightweight devices can now start to use this mixing strategy. And here's a picture taken from an Elixir architecture white paper, which gives you a general idea of what the idea is. So if you have a bunch of pre-computation going on, the keys are sort of available when the traffic arrives to be mixed, and then the mixing can be done faster. So that's the general idea. And in fact, in order to be able to do that properly, you need some kind of pipelining. So you need basically lots of groups of nodes, which they call teams in this architecture, which are carrying out the pre-computation, while a small subset of them are actually acting as mixes. So it's just a matter of amortizing the computation in such a way that you don't have to do it in real time. So these mixes in this new architecture are called cMixes, and this architecture here basically involves a cascade of a fixed number of nodes. So you have a fixed number of source destination pairs that can be handled. One message coming in from each source, they're all required to be of the same length so that the length doesn't give away the anonymity information. They're treated as a batch and processed together. The processing involves some kind of group homomorphic crypto system, which I don't want to get into. But you can think of it as at a schematic level as basically giving you completely equiprobable outputs for a given inputs batch. So I'm just going to show you some pictures to illustrate what's going on. So let's say that you have a batch of 4 source destination pairs. They're red, blue, green, and brown. And the system, a cascade of 3 mixes. Basically what's going on is that the mixes are using this cryptographic structure. They sort of work together in some kind of group cryptographic way so that they present what's equivalent to a public key to these sources. And there are also individual keys between the sources and the mix that they talk to. And this is what's going on. So the red packet wants to go here, the blue one wants to go there, etc., the green, etc. And these are all grouped together and timed so that they all look like they're coming out here. Of course, somebody looking at this will be able to figure out what's going on. But because they're all put inside envelopes, this is the picture seen by an outside observer. So the outside observer just sees a bunch of 4 black packets in all these intermediate stages, and they have no idea who's going where. Now, what's claimed in this system is that because this is a message-based system, traffic analysis cannot compromise anonymity. But the basic thesis of this work is that messages are parts of flows that are latency constrained, and therefore, even if you're message-based, there are not enough messages in the flow, then the batch anonymity will be compromised. And these pictures illustrate the thesis of this work. So let's say that there are 2 of these source destination pairs just don't have packets. Well, you go through this system, you still have 2 packets going through, and this is what the observer sees. But the observer has much less uncertainty in this case. For instance, in the extreme case, when there's just 1 packet, whether it's black or not, you kind of know who's talking to who, right? So the real issue from a timing analysis point of view is to figure out when you want to group these packets together to send them forward with the delay constraint in such a way as to maximize the entropic uncertainty. And that's pretty much my last slide about what we're doing. So we are adopting a Markov decision theory viewpoint. I don't want to go into the techniques of that particularly since I have no time. But the idea is that at any given time, you have a state of what kinds of packets are around from the different sources. And they all have some delays that they've already used up and a certain amount of delay that they have left. And the question is, should you keep waiting or should you just group packets together and send them forward within this cascaded cMix system? And this gives you some kind of rule-based way of trying to optimize anonymity delay trade-off. And I think I'll stop there and take questions if there's any time. And again, thanks very much to all of you for listening and to CLTC for enabling this work.